Welcome to What is Good, a podcast from the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, where we explore contemporary cultural issues through a biblical lens. Micah 6:8 says that God has told us what is good, that we're to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with Him. So whether you're seeking a better understanding of how to live that out, or you're just curious to understand a Christian perspective of what's happening in our culture, we hope that you'll find today's conversation helpful as we discuss what is good.
Welcome to What is Good, a podcast from the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission. I'm Irene Gallegos, Director of Hunger and Care, and today I'm joined by our fabulous directors, our Director of Ethics and Justice, Dr. David Sanchez.
Yay, I love being described as fabulous.
All right, our Director of Public Policy, John Litzler.
Good morning, Irene.
And our extra fabulous Director of the CLC, Dr. Katie Frigé.
Yes, extra fabulous. Take that.
I mean, I'm in a sweatshirt and you're dressed for work, so.
So, extra fabulous.
There we go. So I recently visited the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty in Waco and learned more about their history and collaboration with former director of the CLC, Susie Painter, who really called for an end to hunger in Texas. So beyond the work that the CLC was already doing at the time, just really having a heart and desire to create strategies and envision what it could look like to truly end hunger in Texas. And so this visit reignited my passion for public health and reminded me of what first piqued my interest in the CLC. So to kick us off, I'd like for us to think about the conditions of the neighborhood that you grew up in. So consider what type of homes were around, the walkability of the sidewalks, recreational parks, the water, soil, or air quality, presence of violence, accessibility for differently abled, transportation. You don't have to answer all of those, but just kind of walk us through your neighborhood growing up.
I had a wonderful neighborhood growing up. We talked about this a little bit on a previous episode. I think when we talked about like how I got to stay out till late at night with my friends and everything because it was so safe. There wasn't a lot of violence or crime in my entire town, but particularly not in my neighborhood. The way that I think of it when I talk about it being kind of that idyllic neighborhood is it's where everybody wanted to come trick-or-treating, right? Those neighborhoods where you can just drop off your kids and let them run through the neighborhood and go visit all the houses because it's safe and you know that no one's leaving this neighborhood and it's a safe place to trick-or-treat.
Did you have the king-size candy bars?
We had a guy who worked for the Coca-Cola company who gave out 12-ounce cans.
Oh my gosh.
He would go up.
That's awesome.
He would have Coca-Cola products, and you could go get a 12-ounce can. He just had tubs of it, and so that was always a favorite stop because you needed a soda with your candy. But we had good sidewalks. They were walkable. We could bike them. There was not a lot of air pollution. It wasn't a metropolitan area, so no public transportation. I can see how it would be very hard to live in that town if you didn't have a car. Because there's no public transportation, nothing is walkable. I mean, the streets are walkable and they have good sidewalks, but there's nothing to walk to. And then the only other thing I would say that's interesting is while there was no air pollution, Hopkins County was the dairy capital of the world at one point. Lots of dairy farms.
The dairy capital?
Mm-hmm.
What?
We had gigantic cows out in front of our high school, like statues of cows. Gigantic, massive statues of cows because we had a dairy museum that shared a parking lot with our high school. And if the wind was blowing the right way, you smelled cows. I wouldn't call it air pollution necessarily, but man, did you smell those stinky cows.
It's a different type of air quality.
Yeah, different type of air quality. But it was a good neighborhood, and it was a good place to be. Good.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think as I said in previous episodes like John, I also grew up in a really great neighborhood, kind of close-knit community. It was most of the community was built around a golf course, and so fairly walkable, except they were really snooty and didn't want the kids on the golf course, so I was never allowed to actually go over there. But it was a really great little area. However, I will say, kind of unique and fun fact about me, the neighborhood that I grew up in was in a floodplain, and so we did experience semi-frequently some pretty significant flooding. My house was always on the higher ground, but I have very vivid memories of neighborhood homes being underwater, being locked in our neighborhood, not being able to escape because there was no passable ways in or out of the area if you didn't have a boat. And so it was still an interesting, safe mostly experience, but did get to live through a few floods.
Wow. Thank you, Katie.
I can't say that anything really stands out to me about my neighborhood. We didn't have sidewalks, so we're really underprivileged compared to the rest of you guys. What I do recall is the stark contrast between our houses, which popped up in the 80s, and just 2 streets over, where most of the houses on that street were duplexes, whereas most of the houses on our street were individual homes. And also just the difference between the families who came and bought a house and lived next to us forever, and the ones who came in and out of the rental homes, that were on our street. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with a very clear understanding that there's almost a paper thin margin between which house you get to end up in. And then based off of that, what type of neighborhood you're involved in and around. We would hear sirens all the time. The house is 2 streets down from us. There was never anything on our street.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I would say I had a very safe neighborhood. I grew up in a 2-story home, and many of the houses on my street growing up were 2-story homes, and we had fairly walkable sidewalks. I'm pretty sure quite a few of them were cracked, and because I definitely tripped over plenty of them. But we would ride our bikes or rollerblade over to the park and just play at the nearby park. We had a really nice recreational park with a playground, and it was like the staple playground for the area. And so I would say for the most, we did have a safe environment. I will say that in my elementary school, my family, I do remember the contrast difference of I moved from kindergarten to 1st grade, moved school districts because I was in a school district where my mom was a teacher assistant, and then moved to the school district of my neighborhood. And our family was definitely among the first ethnic minorities in that school system. And so I do remember a big difference there. And we were in suburb areas, so no public transportation. But yeah, I would say overall pretty safe. So neighborhoods that we live in, we know that they impact our overall quality of life. And so while we likely didn't have a say in the neighborhood that we grew up in, each of us on this team has moved to a new home within recent years. And so I'm curious, what is maybe one or a few, but at least one reason you chose to live in your current neighborhood?
So my family just moved into a house about 2 years ago now, I want to say. And for us, definitely safety was a concern. The highest concern was just, can we afford it? Because the housing market 2 years ago, I mean, it's not much better now, but it was crazy. And it was a house that just a couple years earlier would have been like 100,000 less than what it was. Y'all know, we're all in the same boat right now. But beside that, it was convenience. Just, is it close to the highway? Is it close to our daughter's school? And yes to all those things. We ended up we took a fixer-upper so that we could afford it in some ways. But the neighborhood and the neighbors that we get to meet and talk to, it feels like, a little bit of a throwback, like being able to actually know your neighbors and be friends with them and stuff. So, yeah, we were going for a vibe. And I want to say, I mean, just honestly, like you end up being most comfortable, I feel like, in the same kind of wealth that you grew up in. I don't know the right way to word that, but we just kind of it's the same social standard of living as what we had grown up with kids. It's like, it's in our minds that for our daughter to have a good childhood, she has to have similar experiences to us, for better or worse. You can critique me for that. I'm open to it.
Yeah, I think our neighborhood where we live was very intentional. We lived in our city. We live in Fort Worth, Texas, and we lived there because we went to seminary in Fort Worth. My husband and I were college sweethearts and then went straight to seminary in Fort Worth after getting married. And my joke is that we lived in Fort Worth for about 5 years before we really lived in Fort Worth. And what I mean by that is you kind of can sometimes, especially if you move somewhere, like the bubble effect definitely can have an impact on you. And so we kind of lived in the seminary world and didn't really get to know or experience our town and the people who live in Fort Worth and who make up Fort Worth. And so about 5 years into living there, we decided to really live in Fort Worth. We really looked into all the different schools and options and things like that. And as we started having kids, that became more skin in the game. And we really kind of fell in love with a local elementary school. And it was real nearby the hospitals, which is also really important to us because you guys know we've got medically fragile children. And so it was really this perfect storm of things. And so we were in a position of being able to just kind of patiently wait until a house became available. And it was really just a situation where the Lord provided. Our house didn't even make it to the market. We literally saw someone post on Facebook that their parents were moving soon, and any curious buyers DM me. And so I literally slid into their DMs, and that's how we ended up in the neighborhood. But it took us about 4 years of kind of renting and waiting to be able to get into the neighborhood that we were hoping to, just because we wanted to be in that elementary school. We knew we wanted to be near the hospital, and we really loved it.
I love that, just the blend of those two. So I have a similar situation where our house did not go on the market. We were looking, and through our realtor found out of a house that was about to go on the market, and so slipped in and really thought, we're really taking a chance, and hopefully they take a chance on us, because it was at the high end of our scale of what we could afford, and it was, we figured the low end of what they could have put it on the market for. And so, but truly the Lord providing. And then, David, I think the reason I was like, when you mentioned, our ideal neighborhoods of what we want to provide our children, I'm raising my children in a different area than what I grew up in. So I grew up in the suburbs, but my children are being raised in a more rural area. And so for me, it was providing more space for them to run around, providing more land, if you will. We don't have a lot of land. I mean, we have a generous 1 acre. And so, but that in itself for me was just, it was more than what I had, but at the same time, not more in the sense of acreage, or even, square footage of the home, but it was just that opportunity to be in nature more. And so for me, that was very important. That was important to have more trees, especially in areas that are becoming a lot more crowded, where we, and truly our oldest, he was born into a different home as far as we lived in Saginaw, and then we moved further out into a more rural area. And so one of the things we thought was our sidewalk is so close. I mean, our front yard was so small, and we wanted to, and yet we had a park right across the street, but we wanted more space for our son to be able to run around and, get into the dirt. And yeah, I mean, and even in previous episode, I talked about just letting him play on the front porch while I'm watching him through the window and washing dishes. It's just, to me, it is very different from what I grew up with, but at the same time, I'll get into this a little bit more, but for us, we took a risk on, because the general area we're at, you have some people that are of a higher socioeconomic status and have 14 plus acres. And then we have just down the road also multiple mobile homes together in a lower socioeconomic status. So we're in an area with such a wide range, and that's what's in our school system. And we knew that. But I will say that now that we are closer to having a kindergarten, it's becoming more of a reality of, okay, what's public school going to look like for our children, and what alternatives are there? But for me, the tipping point, why did we choose that neighborhood, truthfully, was for that freedom to be able to run around and have more space to do that without a busy road nearby.
I love that, Irene, because, our house sits on just a little bit over an acre too, so not large by any means, but definitely something that we were looking for. Kind of like you, we wanted some more space for Vivian. Affordability is a difficult thing in Dripping Springs, and so that deemed a lot of what neighborhoods we were looking at. Some of them you just can't afford, and a lot of the more affordable neighborhoods, the houses are just really close to each other. You know, you look out your dining room and you're looking into your neighbor's dining room, and we want to be close to our neighbors, but we didn't want to be quite that close to our neighbors. And so this was a good fit for us. But the number one thing I think that has determined every house we've lived in some rural areas and some cities. I'm from a rural area. My wife is from Houston, the largest city in Texas. We've struggled to find that blend, that fits our balance of the ways that to David's point, we're both comfortable with the way we grew up. So finding that balance. But the number one thing that's determined every place we've lived is how close is it to our church. Stephanie's on staff at the church. We spend a lot of hours at the church. Our kid is there every day of the week, before school, after school. So we found a place that's only 5 minutes from our church. It is zoned for Dripping Springs School District, which I love because for now that's still a one high school town. The entire community is at the one high school football game on Friday nights. But it has an Austin address, and it's very close to Austin, close to the city, easy access for me to the Capitol or for, art or music or museums or whatever. So that's how we've kind of found our balance. It was really more about location, I think, than anything, close to the church and close to the city, but still having enough land for it to feel like, we weren't packed in somewhere. So,
yeah.
And then right after we moved, they opened up a new HEB 0.8 of a mile away. We didn't know at the time, but you can't beat that. Can't beat that.
Had to slide that in.
trying to get that HEB non-existent sponsorship back after David had talked about how they sacrifice meat to false idols or whatever last time. So.
Oh man. So why all the talk about neighborhoods? What's so important about that is we know that neighborhoods and built environments, so they're one of the 5 domains in the social determinants of health. So U.S. Department of Health and Human Services defines social determinants of health as the conditions in the environments where people are born, live, learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks. And so that definition actually in recent years has been expanded. The worship was not in there before, and even the aging. And so to me, that's even one fascinating point is that public health professionals started expanding how are we looking at quality of life? When we are focusing on public health, where the fixation is on prevention and health outcomes. To me, again, why is this so important even to the CLC is we have so many ministries who focus on community development. That's a large arm of our hunger offering recipients and also our community care grants. We have ministries that truly transform communities. And in the public sector, we have public health professionals who focus on how are the conditions in these areas and how do we work with organizations, faith-based nonprofits and ministries to be able to attain these measurable outcomes. How is it that we are truly moving the needle and shifting and improving quality of health for all people? The church is truly an active part in transforming communities. Like I said, we have amazing organizations, some who focus solely on food distribution, but there are others who expand beyond that and provide comprehensive services. And so going back to the neighborhood aspect, there's some people who choose to live that missional lifestyle. So even here in the U.S., so I think sometimes when we think missionaries, we might think overseas or international. But when we think stateside, here in the U.S., there are some who choose to live missional lifestyles and move to communities, perhaps of a different socioeconomic status than what they were raised with, because they want to be part of that transformation. And so other people choose to live in a different neighborhood, but still advocate and support community transformation in communities of need. And so I'm curious, is one method more in line with biblical principles than the other? Is it more biblical, if you will, quote unquote, to live that missionary lifestyle and live in the community where you want to see transformation, where you see a deeper need? Or is it okay to live in a different community but still advocate and care for the needs of a community that's deeply in need?
Well, I had a few thoughts when I saw this question come up, and I kind of wanted to say a yes to both approach to this because I think that you see examples of both in Scripture. When I look at biblical examples of different transformations or where God is placing people, I think what you see overwhelmingly is God is calling his people to be faithful to be representative of him wherever they're planted. And sometimes God's people are sent to specific communities and areas, maybe even an area they don't want to live in. And he says, plant here, live here, plant gardens, marry, have children here. And then there's other times where he's specifically sending them into the promised land of saying, like, I have this great place I want you to go and live in and be fruitful and multiply. And so I think a biblical approach to this would be trying to be a witness and be faithful wherever God has planted your family, that there's going to be biblical mandates of caring for your children as parents to pass along our faith to the next generation, but also looking out and loving our neighbor as ourselves. And I think that looks different in different communities, but I think the biblical mandate is to do that regardless. I think sometimes we can become so focused on wanting to maybe be missional to like the other community that we forget that even our own neighborhoods that don't look maybe as their need, there's a lot of lostness in my neighborhood. Yes. And it doesn't look like it's a fairly affluent area. It looks nice. The houses are mowed, the yards are trimmed and everything, but they still need a lot. And there's still a lot of need within that community, broken families, hurt relationships. And so that really, in some ways, is our mission field where God has planted us right now. And so I think that Christians, overwhelmingly, the goal is to be faithful whatever community God has placed us in.
That's good.
What do you guys think?
Katie, I think you absolutely nailed it. I love the way that you set this up because it's exactly it. You kind of put words to what I had been thinking in my head. I agree. When I look at Scripture, when I think about what it talks about, where we spend our time, if the idea of home is where the heart is, where does your heart belong? It belongs with God. And I see all these Psalms from David about dwelling in the house of the Lord and Christ telling us to abide in him and how we need to be with God. And so I'd just say, whatever your neighborhood or community looks like, if it's not transforming to look like God, then it's a neighborhood that needs transformation. And some of those neighborhoods are not very well off financially, and they're in food deserts or banking deserts, and they can't get access to a lot of things, and they need better services and more resources. And some of those neighborhoods have a lot of resources, and they're just as broken, and they're just as hurting. And it looks a little different. It's got a nice gilded front to it, really nice neighborhoods, maybe with boats parked in the driveway and really multi-story houses with lots of square footage. But same broken relationships, same addiction, in need of the same Jesus. And I know that if you come from a neighborhood that is less well off financially, you're probably thinking, boy, I'd love to have their problems. But it's nice to have money, but it's a lot of the same problems. And I think of there's a guy here in Austin named Alan Graham who started a ministry called Mobile Loaves and Fishes, which is such a great ministry to the homeless. And they ended up building a community called Community First. They started with just a food truck and then a fleet of food trucks and bringing food to the homeless in Austin. But then they built a community called Community First, and it's a bunch of tiny homes, and they help people get, off the streets and into this neighborhood called Community First. And for the longest time, he maintained his house, which I think is over in the Westlake area. But one night they were in Community First, and they were there late, with the people in the community, and they stayed the night. And then they came back home and they brought toothbrushes and a change of clothes, and they stayed another night. And the way he tells it, they just ended up staying multiple nights before he and his wife finally were like, we spend all our time here anyway. We're in this community. Why don't we just move into this tiny home and live in Community First? And so they had this really nice house in Westlake, which is a very affluent area of Austin, and they sold it and they moved out there. And I think that's great. But I also wouldn't fault them if they had continued to stay in the house in Westlake and commute and continue to live in that community. But the point I take away from that story is, again, home is where the heart is. They were spending all their time in that community, so that's where they wanted to be. So be in the community where you're spending your time. That's why we like to live so close to the church, because we're so invested in the families there, in part because my wife is on staff. But I want to be where those people are. I don't want to be 20, 30 minutes away from the people that I'm trying to do life with. I want to be close to the people I'm trying to do life with. And so if that is in a neighborhood where the transformation is maybe less visible, you're not seeing new construction or renovations or things happening outside, that's all right. As long as, again, I go back to my original point, which is, are we trying to dwell in the presence of the Lord? And are we trying to bring our neighbors into that?
That's good. That's so good. I think of, again, just that community and that calling. So where is God calling us, and what type of community is he asking us to invest in? We live 4 miles up the road from my husband's family, and then an additional 4 miles up the road from us are really close friends of ours. And so it's so beautiful that we all go to the same church, which is in Fort Worth, good 35-minute drive. But the community that we have there is so unique and so special. And I would say, to your point, John, too, of I can think of communities where they may not have access to certain resources. They may not have, the gated communities, but boy, do they have community. Is there that sense of relationship with neighbors? And again, not all, but there are some where you just build that bond. And I think of, for our church, we have a relationship with an apartment building nearby. And, again, limited resources and the things that we can see. But in the things that we can't see, the way that they depend on one another, there's one girl who she is just a leader. And anytime we're there where we have an event where maybe we're providing a meal in the community, she's the one that's going and knocking on all the doors. She knows which doors to knock on, or she knows who's going to still be sleeping in. So she's going to go knock on their doors to wake them up. And so it's really beautiful.
David, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was really trying to hone in because I liked the challenge of what scriptures come to mind. We haven't really mentioned any yet, I noticed, in our conversation.
I referenced them without...
Take it away.
I referenced them
New Testament
without
scholar.
citing them specifically. I was thinking
Yes,
of several
that's
verses
true.
in Psalms, but I just didn't cite them. But yes.
That's true. I heard many allusions and echoes of scripture. You're not being unbiblical in your answers, I will say that. But I took up the challenge because I was like, I can't think of, you can't find a verse that says specifically for all believers to leave everything you have and go into a poorer community. We do have verses like in Proverbs 31:8-9, right? Open your mouth for the mute, for those who are poor and destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. So we are supposed to defend the oppressed and speak up for them, which you'll get to later. There's also plenty of verses just about caring for the poor, right? Or those who are who have less than we do. If you have 2 coats, give one to somebody who doesn't have one. My favorite is the let him who steals steal no longer in Ephesians 4:28. But let him work with his hands so he can give to those in need. I really like that one. Then I started thinking, well, okay, maybe if I comb through Jesus' the sheep and the goats, we could find something in there because he goes through 6 different needs that people have, right? I was hungry and you gave me food. I was a stranger. You welcomed me in. Well, that's just having them come to my house. I don't actually have to go to their house. So far I'm off the hook. If they're sick, visit them. If they're in prison, go and care for them. But you don't see like a very specific command that says when it comes to any one particular ministry, this is the right way to do that ministry. So like y'all were just jumping to the end. I tried to really see if I could comb through the scriptures and find anything. You have the incarnational model of Jesus himself, who took on flesh and became one for us. But he was also redeeming humanity in that. But nevertheless, anytime you do lower and humble yourself to be among a lower group and to give up your privileges, you are modeling the self-sacrificing love of Christ. John, you were going to mention one?
Yeah, what about the rich young ruler, right? When Christ tells him, he says, hey, I've followed the rules. I've loved the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, and mind, and my neighbor as myself. And then Jesus kind of presses him on the loving the neighbor as yourself. And he's like, all right, then sell everything you have and give it to the poor, right? This is really what that means for you. Presumably that means his house, right? Like I've always wondered, like if he did go sell his house, then where does he go, right? Like would he have to move to a new community? Would he have to move to a new neighborhood? I mean, possibly.
Yeah, that's a good point. He knew his pressure point. That's for sure.
100%. 100%.
Yes.
I also think of like Paul tent making in Corinth. Like Paul could have had a bougie life, right? But here he is, like among the working class, among the lower class, and happy with that status while he was among the people in Corinth, ministering there for 18 months. But then Paul also didn't have a family that he was lugging around with him everywhere. So everyone's situation is going to be different. You got to listen to the Spirit speaking to you. But I, as someone who's married to a social worker, I also have to say this, that I feel like sometimes people get this idea of, wow, it will be really noble for me to just leave everything I have and go and be a blessing to this community of underprivileged people. And won't it be great for me to come in and grace them with my presence? And boy, that's the wrong attitude to have when going in, isn't it? And
Yes.
oftentimes, one of the common mistakes, I won't even get into the pride part of it or the it's Jesus and the Spirit that they need, and we need to be conduits. We're not the blessing ourselves. We bring the blessing. Well, I said I wasn't going to go into it, and then I said the full thing. But I think one of the dangers we have when we have that mentality is we look at a perceived need and we meet that perceived need while not meeting the actual need. And I always think of a story my wife told me of a school where they were like doing a contest or something. And when a family won that contest and they said, what does this family's need? They noticed that family didn't have a refrigerator. And so they bought that family a refrigerator. And the family, living paycheck to paycheck, they weren't in the habit of buying food that you would even put in a refrigerator. And you know what they did with it? They sold it and went on a vacation. Because for them, what they really needed was just an escape to get away and to be together and enjoy time together as a family. And it just showed me, wow, I would have thought the refrigerator was an easy win, but it wasn't actually. It was a perceived need, but it wasn't seeing what the real need was, because they hadn't, like with John's story, they hadn't gone and lived among them first or just been among them enough to know the needs and then felt God calling him to live among them. So even if you would say, yeah, you know what, when you're in the midst of them and you're living with them, maybe you can be more effective. There's still a right way to do that and a wrong way to do that. And you've got to listen to God and not rush the process and not think one way is holier than the other.
That's so good. What humility to say, Lord, give me eyes to see, and not to see, obviously the way that we would in our perspective, but give me your eyes, your vision, to see the needs. And public health often, we talk about strengths base and what are the strengths in the community. So I want to dive in a little bit to an analogy that's used by someone who's well known in the public health community, Dr. Kamara Phyllis Jones. She's a physician, epidemiologist, and former president of the American Public Health Association. And she's well known for her cliff of good health analogy. So the analogy, it starts off, and there's a visual that we can link in the show notes. But the analogy starts off by imagining someone walking along a path and oops, they fall off the cliff of good health. So it might sound morbid, but bear with me. There's some good to hear. So she then explains, so if that were us, and if we fall off of the cliff of good health, we may be relieved to know that there's an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff to rush us to the hospital. She then asks, what else could help? Perhaps a net halfway up the cliff to catch people and prevent injuries and illness. Well, then even before that, she says, what else can we do to even prevent the fall? Perhaps a fence at the top of the cliff to prevent people from falling. But if there's too many people, it's so crowded up there, not even a fence would help people from falling over. So we need to push people further back. And so here this is equivalent to addressing the drivers of poor health, also known as the social determinants of health. So things like unsafe housing, low wages, under-resourced schools, they push people towards the edge of the cliff of good health. And so in essence, it's pushing people towards poor health outcomes, lower quality of life. And so she wraps up by sharing that resources and people, they're not evenly distributed on the cliff. So she then says the cliff is not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. And there's differences in the quality of the fence. There could be holes in the fence. There could be broken parts of the fence. The net, halfway, even if you have a net, there could be holes in the net. It could not be properly fastened. Or the ambulance. Maybe there's an ambulance, but there's no local hospital that's within reasonable distance to get to. Maybe the ambulance has a flat tire. And so these differences, that's what represents inequalities. And so differences in the presence of the fence, so whether there is a fence or not, whether there is a net or not, or an ambulance, represent differences in access to care. differences in the quality of the fence are overall the drivers in poor health. And then the differences in the distance to the edge of the cliff. So again, is it overcrowded? Are there more people being pushed and pushed? Represent differences in opportunities, exposures, and stressors that drive people towards the edge of the cliff. And so again, we have so many aspects when we talk again about the social determinants of health, the conditions in which people are born in, live, work, play, worship, and age. These conditions are what are driving the health outcomes. And so undoubtedly, there are many layers to addressing community transformation. And again, one of the reasons why I loved the work of the CLC when I first learned of it is because of this comprehensive approach in all of the areas of the CLC in improving equitable access to resources and promoting holistic health. So this may be something that's obvious or known by our listeners, but maybe this is new for some of our listeners. What are some of the specific ways that the CLC is involved in helping prevent people from falling off the cliff in Dr. Jones' analogy? Or in other words, how are we involved in systemic issues?
Irene, the first thing that comes to my mind when you pose this question is one of our 4 public policy priorities is fair and just financial practices. And so I think about financial practices, and I referenced this earlier, but I didn't really flesh it out. Banking deserts in areas where people are unbanked and don't have easy access to money, that makes it prevalent place for payday lenders and auto title lenders to come in and set up, and they will allow you to borrow money, but they charge very high interest, and they either take it out of your next paycheck or take the title to your car. And if you can't pay it back, then they take the title to your vehicle. And just listening to the stories of people who share about how they got caught up in payday lending and a cycle of debt where they may pay thousands of dollars in interest, but zero to the principal, and they owe just as much or more as they did after taking out the loan, even though they've paid thousands of dollars. I think of these people who are on the edge of the cliff and who the safety net has a hole in it for them. And the way that they start needing these loans is very similar to what you're talking about. They're already near the edge of the cliff, and then something happens. A car breaks down, and they have to have a way to get to work. A friend has a medical emergency, and they need a few $1,000s that they just don't have in savings because they've been living paycheck to paycheck. There's a funeral out of state they've got to travel to for a family member. And now they don't have the easy access to those funds. And, when people share these stories, they'll say, I knew the loan was a bad idea. Like, I knew financially it didn't make sense, but I was trying to save my job and my apartment or my place to live. I didn't want to lose my apartment. I didn't want to lose my job. And then after paying thousands of dollars and being stuck in this debt, the exact thing I feared is what happened anyway. Now I don't have an apartment. I lost my job and my credit is shot, and I'm, even in a bigger hole than I was before I took out the loan. And so anyway, that's a long way of saying that's what I think of when I think of this question. And what are we doing? We're advocating for laws in Texas that prevent the exploitation of people who need to borrow money. Yes, the state allows you to charge interest, but there are laws against usury. We shouldn't take advantage of people in vulnerable situations. We shouldn't, the same way we have laws that say you can't, multiply the price of milk by 10 when a hurricane hits. You shouldn't be able to do that to people who are financially vulnerable, but payday lenders and auto title lenders get around our usury laws. They exploit loopholes. And so one thing that we do at the CLC is we try to say, we are going to stop exploiting poor people in this state, and we've got to set up rules and regulations that prevent that.
If I could just add some tangible numbers to what John is saying, all the way back in 2019, and things are probably worse now, but back in 2019, the average loan size in Texas for these payday loans was $1,044. The average total that they paid with fees and interest was $2,408. So just on average, people are paying over double what the loan amount was to begin with. And the companies are made over $2 billion in rollover fees alone.
$2 billion with a B.
$2 billion with a B.
Wow.
That's insane. What gets me when we talk about payday lending, guys, is that for me, it's not just people that don't have a name. I know people within my own family, siblings, and people that I have worked with in different organizations that this is their reality.
Yeah.
So to me, it has a name. It is just amazing and saddening that is their reality. And they had no idea. Maybe they knew it was a bad idea, John, like you said, and I do think that. But I think some of them don't even realize the extent of that bad idea and the consequences.
Yeah. It's hard to explain what, desperation will do to your judgment in any situation. But desperation can lead to difficult decisions and poor decisions. And then one other thing I want to elaborate on, the CLC has historically worked with cities to get city ordinances that don't stop payday lending, but rein it in, that put caps on how much interest you can charge and how many times you can roll over the loan, and all of it going to interest and none of it to principal, to fix that so there's a balance and you're paying some principal and paying it off over time. And there was a bill I'm thankful for the historic stuff the CLC has done, but there was a bill last session that was going to wipe all that out. It was going to say only the state can regulate this area and cities can't have any regulation on it. And so grateful for the work of the CLC and other advocates in this area that we were able to get that bill amended so that any of the existing payday lending ordinances in cities, and about 1/3 of all Texans are protected by some type of payday lending ordinance at a local level, that those are protected, they're grandfathered in, and they have not been preempted by state law. I'm just really grateful for the CLC being able to have a part of that.
House Bill 2127.
Also sometimes referred to as the Death Star bill, depending on who you talk to.
I like that.
I can only remember it as the Death Star bill. I love it.
Yes.
Y'all had said earlier something about, these aren't just numbers. These are people. These are faces. These are, friends of ours that we know of. And I'm kind of pivoting in a different direction from what John said. I think about the work that we've done with the Texas Baptist Hunger Offering, and the way that, especially, I thought back to 2020. If y'all remember, COVID happened, and it was like the parents who lived during that time jokingly referred to it as the spring break that never ended, because a lot of Texas schools went on spring break and then we didn't come back to school for over a year. But practically, tangibly, during that time, I was serving as the director for hunger and care for the CLC, and we saw overnight thousands of Texas children who were regularly dependent on getting their free or reduced school lunch, usually for breakfast and then lunch, and then oftentimes getting food to go home with them, just completely wiped out. My daughter at the time was attending a Title I school for a preschool program for children with disabilities, and every single one of the kids there was getting a free meal for lunch every day, and suddenly that food was no longer accessible to them. And I think about just the stories that we heard pouring in overnight of Texas Baptist Hunger Offering ministries that were just suddenly on the front line of a pandemic that they didn't see coming, they weren't ready for, and had to pivot fast to be able to get that food out to those kids, to those families who suddenly didn't have that access to food. They weren't hungry the week before, but it was an opportunity, first of all, to empower and support those ministries who were doing that frontline work, but also try to help bring some education to people who don't often think about what food insecurity means. Like, they understand hunger, they understand people who don't have a meal. It was a good educational opportunity for the CLC team to really kind of go on an educational campaign to show people this is what food insecurity actually means when we're talking about this. Yes, maybe they have a meal today, but there's no access or there's no guarantee that they're going to have it again tomorrow. And we had such a real life trauma that we lived through, experiencing, seeing those school lunches suddenly and how that impacted so many kids across the state. And I was so thankful and just blown away at how the Hunger Offering Ministries kind of rose to the occasion, and using that as an opportunity to support them as best we could. People gave generously, even in a difficult economic situation, and then also using our voice to be able to educate others on the importance of food security and why that matters as well.
And you were the director of hunger and care at the time, right? So you were just like right on the front lines of all of it.
Yeah, it was incredible just to hear people selflessly serving and sharing their stories with us. We would do interviews with them every Friday morning. I would just record a different interview with them. And we should put some of those stories in our show notes, because if you want to go back and just be encouraged and see how far the Lord has carried us, it's pretty cool.
So good. In line with that, when I think of our community care grant, so we have within Hunger and Care, the care component is we have our community care grants. And in one of the recent reports from our hospitality house, just seeing over and over how families, there was one, you mentioned the Alvarado family who had not seen their son in years. And so when they went to visit their loved one who was incarcerated, they only had to think about the cost of travel, but not have to consider how are we going to stay somewhere? How are we going to afford to stay somewhere? There was a recent report of a lady who was visiting a loved one incarcerated, and she came from Canada. And she goes every 6 months, and so she's a regular visitor of this hospitality house. And she says, I wouldn't be able to do this and visit regularly if it weren't for the hospitality house. And to me, what that means is not just a visit, but what does that visit do? If we're thinking about reducing rates of recidivism, one of the greatest aspects of helping reduce that is social support, providing that social support for someone who is incarcerated. We can provide a ton of resources for occupation, jobs, meals, and those are needed resources as well. In addition, it's, to me personally, and the studies show that how is recidivism addressed long term, a big component of that is social support. And so if we're able to help foster that and nurture that social support while they're incarcerated, so that they can maintain these relationships and not have these burnt bridges with family members because they haven't seen them for years. But if we're able to help foster that relationship while they're incarcerated, so that relationship can be someone of support as they go back and are either released, if they are going to be released on parole, probation, whatever it may be, then what a joy to help contribute also long term for someone who's incarcerated.
Okay, Irene, you just hit on something. I'm going to pivot one. I know I've already shared one, but I'm going to share again. I want to pivot one more time, which is to highlight. So the first time I was talking a lot about the advocacy stuff we do at the Capitol, because that's kind of where I live. But one of the things that I think we don't think about connected to this as often is a lot of the work that David does, our ethics and justice stuff, and the way that he kind of helps us tackle difficult topics. We've had a podcast recording about how to talk about issues in gray areas, whether it's talking about sexuality or other difficult topics in our culture today. Those are areas where we fight a lot, and we lose relationships over the way that we deal with those. And a lot of when we're talking, I'm going back to your original analogy here about the net, the safety net, the cliff, the ambulance, or whatever. We burn a lot of bridges with people. And a lot of times we have people, even maybe within our own family, where we've had a falling out, and what used to be a stronger social structure where I could turn to an extended family member or I could turn to someone in my community, we've tribalized ourselves so much where it's like, well, I can't reach to anybody outside of my tribe. Or maybe I do, but they're not going to help me because I'm not in their tribe. I don't affiliate with the correct political party or whatever tribe, we've placed ourselves into. And we lose a lot of that. And so one of the reasons we're also dangerously close to falling off the cliff and falling through the holes is because we've lost the ability to have these difficult conversations well. We've lost the ability to show each other the love of Christ, even when we disagree or even when someone's lifestyle is really different than ours. So I'm just appreciative that we have a director of ethics and justice that kind of helps us focus on those relationships.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Honestly, this has been to me just an encouraging conversation of considering, when we may not be a direct neighbor to, and we cannot be a neighbor for everyone, but we may not be in a neighborhood where there are people of poorer, lower socioeconomic status. But what a joy it is that we have the opportunity to advocate, to speak on issues that are important to God's heart, that we're able to examine Scripture, to really ask God to transform our mind, our heart, renew our mind, so that we can be that light in the world. And so you guys know that I appreciate opportunities to redirect our focus on the good. So with an encouraging way to end our time today, tell us, what is good?
In light of today's topic, well, first of all, John, thanks for being so kind to me after I called you out for not using any scripture in your answer earlier. That was very good, ethical and godly of you. So, ethical and just of you to do that. Man, I've got a what is good that just fits so well with this. Our family was late to church yesterday, and when we got there, we came in and they had cut off the worship earlier than usual, so we had to come in awkwardly while someone was up there speaking. It was our next gen minister with 3 ladies on the stage sitting there, and one of the ladies had the mic and she was talking, and I'm like, oh, okay, who is this? It turns out it's the principal for the elementary school that's just a few blocks from where our church is, that we have been partnering with and trying to help encourage the elementary school as well as the community around it. And she was there along with one of the teachers and along with the school counselor, and they just shared their thanks for how our church has been involved and challenged us even more for how we can be an encouragement to the students and to the teachers and to the community as a whole. And I just sat there and was just like, I love our church. I love that on a Sunday I can walk in and find 3 public servants of the school who, by the way, 2 of the 3 live in that community that they're serving. And so it blew me away. And I was just really humbled and thankful that our church is a part of that. So that's my what is good.
What a joy. I'm going to tie into that just to highlight and thank David's church even more. But Bits for Bites is an amazing event that you do, David. And thank you for
playing
having
video
the creativity.
games. You are welcome.
Thank you for playing video games on the job. What a joy to see how different people engage in Bits for Bites. I've seen some of our Texas Baptist staff have their swag and their postcards or magnets, just different items with the Bits for Bites info. But to also see different people in your gaming community be able to participate and give. I think one of the donations even said this guy. And so I love and appreciate how this brings people together. And a large part of who gives is from David's church. And what I think last year's goal was it was around 4,000.
Last year's goal was 5,000 and we got to 4,800.
Okay.
Yeah.
And more than doubled that this year, and so nearly $10,000 for the hunger offering. Like if I had a burr, 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 like sound effect, that would there you go. That is huge. That is so huge. So thank you, David. Thank you to your church and just so many other Texas Baptist staff and just generous people who gave to the hunger offering through Bits for Bites. What a joy to be able to support these ministries.
Yeah, it was over 7,000 just from church members.
Wow.
Around 1,500 from our Texas Baptist staff. So that was really cool. And then from the community, there were gifts. Someone gave from Germany, from France, from Spain, and from Australia. So
wow.
It's just
so
neat
cool.
to see it grow and to see people be faithful givers all 4 years too.
Yes.
That's wonderful. What is good, David and his church and his sound effects. I love that you had that ready to go. And I'm also disappointed. I'm also disappointed that you've had that ready to go every podcast recording probably, and we've never done well enough to earn one before.
John made another disclaimer in the introduction.
Can I get a different button?
No, push yours. I love your button, Irene. Push it.
No! This is my last word. No!
Your button is perfect for you, Irene. I'm so glad I got you
That's
that.
the no button. That's perfect.
Yes.
So my what is good is also related to today's topic, talking about neighborhoods and where we live and that kind of thing. So there was a period of time right after Stephanie and I changed jobs and we were moving from San Antonio to this Dripping Springs area where we couldn't sell our house in San Antonio and we couldn't afford to buy a house here in Drip. That we rented a condo or apartment downtown in Austin. It was really fun. It was really neat, right? Really close to campus. I think Katie's family got to stay there one night, so she can testify. It was really neat.
It was super cool.
I loved it too. It's nice.
David came. It was really
yeah.
cool. But one of the things that was always going on was construction. Every morning, 6:30, 7 a.m., we would hear construction going. And one block over, literally like across the street, they were building a new Travis County family courthouse. And they worked on it the entire 6 to 7 months we were in that apartment. And we heard it every single morning, weekends too. And at this point, I'm already doing a general counsel, in-house counsel thing for Texas Baptist. I'm not doing my regular law family practice. My family law days are long behind me. And I thought, I am never stepping foot in that building. All it is right now to me is a nuisance with all this construction, waking my daughter up every morning. But y'all know we're fostering right now. And last week, our foster child's hearing was in that Travis family courthouse across the street from the apartment that we had lived in. And it was good to be in that building. It was a good hearing. I was very pleased by the judge and just all of the stuff going on in that building. It was a really nice building. Obviously, it's a brand new courthouse there in Austin. And I just thought about how God directs our steps, right? Like even before we weren't able to foster because we were in the apartment and it just wasn't a good environment for it, but we knew we wanted to again. And so it was just a tough season in between houses. Couldn't foster like we'd been fostering in San Antonio. And God's like, nope, already building it, already preparing a place. This courthouse is right here. You don't realize it, but you see every day the place where you will come back when you're fostering. And anyway, it was just really great.
That's so beautiful. Mine is so shallow compared to all of y'all's now. This is, I don't even know. My what is good is really lighthearted, but I am just so thankful. Our neighbor who lives directly in front of my house has this incredible grill. It's huge, and he shares it so openly and freely, and I'm just so thankful for his generous spirit. So he texted my husband at 8 o'clock on Saturday night and said, hey, I'm firing up the grill if you want to put anything on. And by 9:30, my husband was able to run to Kroger, get 3 briskets, and had them all on the grill. And 12 hours later, they were delicious. And so we had a feast yesterday, and just of all sorts of deliciousness that all came because we have a generous neighbor who shares his grill.
I saw those pictures you posted, and I thought y'all must have gone to a restaurant with a pitmaster or something. Those looked so good.
The grill does a lot of the magic, but y'all, my husband, if this is our midlife crisis, is becoming a grill master, this is the burden I must carry. So
none of the meat was sacrificed to idols, right?
None of it. We did offer thanks to God, though, for it.
Oh, there you go.
And in Texas, barbecue is almost a religion. So I don't know that that's shallow. I think that's perfect. It's connected.
Oh, man.
It's connected to neighborhood. It's connected to community and neighborhood.
It was community.
There you go,
It was
yes.
so good.
Yes,
we all shared it. And we did invite friends in and shared it, even giving plates of meat away to other people. So, yeah, it was a wonderful experience yesterday of just celebrating delicious Texas barbecue.
So good. Well, all of them are so good. And so thank you for joining us for today's episode of What is Good, a podcast from the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission. See ya.
We have the out music or something.
Yes.
I tried to imitate the out music last time, and David kept it in, so I'm not doing that anymore.
I also have this thing right here. I just hadn't.
Is that multiple?
Oh, it's got like 20 sound effects.
It has a snare drum that I thought would be drum roll, but it's that would have been more accurate at the fall off the cliff part.
Yeah. It gives me a lot of Tom and Jerry vibes.
Yeah,
Yes, I can see that.
100%.
That's actually the teenager in my house would now say it's giving Tom and Jerry. That's how you would say that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they leave off the vibes part. It's giving Tom and Jerry.
It's giving Tom and Jerry.
Yeah. Tell us more about payday lending.